"We're not making art," the teacher said. "We're remembering how to play." And play they did. Ms. Lucy's fingers weren't as nimble as they once were. Her stitches wobbled. The paint sometimes bled outside the lines, but none of that mattered. With each brushstroke, each woven thread, she was reminded of something she hadn't felt in a while, a sense of exploration, of expression, of presence. Soon, one class became 2, then 3. She joined a writing circle, not to be published, just to find her voice, to sit in a room with others who carried stories in their bones and were finally giving those stories space to breathe. On Wednesdays, she began learning basic computer skills, not because she wanted to keep up, but because she wanted to stay connected. Her granddaughter had helped her send her first email. Now, Ms. Lucy was sending birthday messages, receiving photos, and even attending online readings from home. These activities weren't about filling time. They were about staying awake to herself. She started noticing the changes, not just in her skills, but in how she felt when she woke up in the morning. There was a lightness, a small excitement, a sense of purpose not tied to obligation, but to discovery. Her world was getting bigger again, not through travel or grand events, but through small doors that opened inside her. Each new skill, each shared laugh, each moment of "I didn't know I could still do that" became a thread in a tapestry of renewal. And maybe the most beautiful part was this: she never felt out of place. In every group there were others, like her, not defined by age, but by wonder. Not there to impress, but to be real, to be seen. In these circles of creation and learning, Ms. Lucy began to understand something quiet but profound. Our minds don't close with age. They open in new ways if we let them, if we nourish them, if we give them places to stretch and soften, to try and stumble, to remember what it means to be fully, joyfully alive. And for her, that made all the difference. It was during a quiet afternoon while organizing some old documents that Ms. Lucy paused and looked out the window. The sky was soft with late light, and her tea had gone cold. In her lap was a folder marked Finances, a folder she had avoided more times than she cared to admit. Money, for most of her life, had been something she managed out of necessity, not because she had plenty, but because she had always been careful. Still, now that she was older, the questions had changed. They weren't just about bills and budgets anymore. They were about how to sustain freedom, how to make sure that the choices she valued, living in her own home, enjoying her routine, supporting herself with dignity, could continue. So, for the first time in years, she decided not to push those papers aside. Instead, she made an appointment with a financial counselor at the local senior resource center. She expected the usual numbers and charts, but what she found was someone who asked her first, "What matters most to you?" That question stayed with her. Over the following weeks, they worked through everything slowly: income, savings, insurance, small investments. They talked about priorities, not just expenses, about how to prepare for unexpected needs without living in fear, about how to simplify her accounts, update legal documents, and create a monthly plan that gave her clarity, not confusion. She learned about support programs she hadn't realized she qualified for, discovered ways to reduce costs that didn't compromise her comfort, and most of all, she found peace of mind. Ms. Lucy wasn't trying to accumulate more. She was trying to feel steady, grounded, in control of her present and at ease with her future. And this wasn't just about money. It was about autonomy. She began making choices with greater ease, She set aside a little each month for things that brought her joy: a garden magazine subscription, a new set of watercolor brushes, tickets to a local theater production. She wasn't waiting for permission to enjoy her life. She was creating the conditions to do so freely. Sometimes she would sit at her desk, run her hands over the documents she once feared, and feel a quiet sense of pride, not because everything was perfect, but because she had chosen to face what once felt overwhelming. And in doing so, she reclaimed something essential: her agency. There's a kind of confidence that doesn't come from what we have, but from what we understand. Ms. Lucy now understood where she stood, and that understanding made her choices lighter, her days less burdened by what-ifs. With each decision, she was building not just a plan, but a future that honored her needs, her hopes, and her right to live with independence. And in that future, she saw something beautiful: not control over every outcome, but clarity. And with clarity came freedom, the kind that doesn't shout, but whispers gently. You are prepared. You are supported. You are enough. There is something quietly powerful about a woman who chooses to shape her own story, even when others suggest it's time to slow down, to step aside, to make room for a new generation. Ms. Lucy didn't reject help or ignore her years. She welcomed both, but she did so on her terms, with reflection, with care, and with a gentle insistence that her life still had seasons to live. When her family suggested a nursing home, it wasn't rejection that guided her response. It was a deeper knowing, a sense that, even now, there was more to explore, more to learn, more to become. She wasn't clinging to the past. She was reaching toward a present that still held possibility. Her choices weren't loud or dramatic. They were quiet and steady: a bar installed by the bath, a walk to the corner and back, a new meal prepared with purpose, a class that sparked a forgotten joy, a plan that offered ease instead of worry. Each decision was a thread, and together they formed a new kind of tapestry, one woven not of resistance but of presence. It's easy to forget, in a world that moves quickly, that aging is not the end of growth, that it can be a return to what truly matters, that it can be a refining fire, softening what no longer serves, and revealing what always has. Miss Lucy's story isn't rare because of what she did. It's rare because she chose to listen to herself, to her needs, to the quiet voice that said, "Keep going." And in doing so, she offered more than a model of aging. She offered a mirror, one that reflects the truth so many carry deep inside, that we are not finished, just unfolding. There's a moment, just before the light shifts at the end of the day, when everything feels golden. Still. Open. That's where Miss Lucy lives now. Not waiting for what's next, but fully awake to what is. She walks through her home with ease, greets her community with laughter, moves her body with care, eats with joy, learns with curiosity, plans with clarity, but most of all, she lives with presence. Her story is not a blueprint. It is a reminder that transformation doesn't come all at once. It arrives in gestures, in pauses, in listening. Perhaps that's the quiet invitation, at the heart of it all, to trust that even in later chapters, life still writes with grace, that the soul doesn't retire, and that somewhere inside each of us, there's still a garden ready to bloom. Ms. Lucy had built something she hadn't known she was missing, a circle that listens, not with answers, but with heart. And in that circle, she began to remember what it felt like to belong, to be part of a rhythm greater than her own, a community not built on obligation but on simple, consistent care. She wasn't leaning on others out of weakness. She was walking beside them in strength. And that made all the difference. There was a time when Ms. Lucy moved through her mornings without thinking. Her body knew what to do: reach, bend, lift, step. It had always carried her through life's rhythm without protest. But in recent years, that rhythm had changed. The steps became more careful, the reaching more measured, and sometimes her body answered back with quiet aches that lingered longer than they used to. Still, she wasn't looking for ways to fix herself. She wasn't chasing youth or pretending the years hadn't passed. What she wanted was something gentler, a way to keep moving that honored her pace, something that didn't push but supported. It began with a short walk. One morning, after a restless night, Ms. Lucy stepped outside and decided not to sit. Instead, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked the length of her street, slowly, with purpose, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the earth steady beneath her feet. It wasn't far, but it was enough to wake something inside her. Later, that week, she visited the community center again, not for company this time, but for movement. A small group gathered in a quiet room. No mirrors, no loud music, just mats, chairs, and a soft voice guiding them through gentle stretches. The instructor, a man in his 60s, smiled as she walked in. "This isn't about pushing yourself," he said. "It's about returning home to your body." And it felt just like that. She moved slowly, intentionally. She learned how to stretch her arms in a way that opened her chest, how to breathe into her back, how to shift her weight from heel to toe, noticing each muscle's quiet response. At first, she was surprised by how tired she felt after the sessions. Not exhausted, but aware of parts of her body she hadn't spoken to in years. In time, the stiffness in her shoulders softened. The ache in her lower back didn't call out as often. But more than that, something deeper changed. A quiet confidence began to grow, not because she was stronger, but because she was listening. Each movement became a conversation. Each breath, a way to say, "I'm here. I'm still living in this body, and I'm grateful for all the ways it still shows up for me." She didn't follow a strict schedule. Some days she walked outside. Other days, she stretched in the living room while her tea cooled beside her. The goal was never perfection, it was presence. Even on the days when her knees protested or her energy felt thin, she found ways to move with grace, a hand tracing slow circles on the kitchen counter, a stretch toward the sunlight coming through the window. Movement became a ritual, not one of discipline, but of devotion. And little by little, Ms. Lucy noticed something else. Her balance improved. She stood taller. She moved with more certainty, not because the years had reversed, but because she had chosen to meet her body with patience instead of pressure. Her body hadn't given up on her. It had simply been waiting for kindness. There was a day when Ms. Lucy stood at her pantry and realized something had changed, not just in the food she reached for, but in the way she related to it. For years, meals had been about habit. What was quick, what was familiar, what filled the space on the plate. But now, something in her wanted more. Not more in quantity, more in meaning. She wasn't trying to follow a strict diet or chase a number on a scale. She simply wanted to feel nourished, clear, awake in her own skin. She wanted her meals to feel like a gift, not a task. It began with a conversation. During a regular checkup, her doctor gently brought up a few numbers. "You're doing well," he said, "but there's room to fine-tune." So Ms. Lucy, never one to shy away from learning, made an appointment with a local nutritionist, a woman who listened more than she spoke, who asked about her routines, her cravings, her favorite meals from childhood. They didn't talk about restriction. They talked about balance, about energy, about bone strength, digestion, and the quiet ways food can either support or strain us as we age. From those conversations, Ms. Lucy began to see her kitchen differently. She added color to her plate: leafy greens, vibrant fruits, whole grains. She found herself reaching for almonds and pumpkin seeds, learned to appreciate the quiet strength of lentils and the bright comfort of citrus. Calcium and fiber stopped being just words on paper. They became stories in her meals, stories of care, of wisdom, of choosing what served her now. She didn't remove everything she loved. She still enjoyed her coffee in the morning, still baked her favorite cake on Sundays. But now, she paired sweetness with substance, celebration with intention. And where her meals had once felt rushed or routine, they now felt sacred. She slowed down, ate at the table, sometimes in silence, sometimes with music playing softly in the background. She began to notice how food made her feel, not just full, but stable, supported. There were days when energy dipped low, when her digestion reminded her that change is gradual. On those days, she gave herself grace, made soup, rested, trusted. That nourishment isn't only found in ingredients, but in kindness. Supplementation also found a place at her table, not as a magic fix, but as quiet support. A little extra calcium, a daily dose of vitamin D. Always guided by her care team, always chosen with thoughtfulness. She didn't chase fads. She listened, and slowly food became more than fuel. It became a form of intimacy with herself, a way to say, "I am worth the effort. My health deserves attention. My body still responds to care." What Ms. Lucy discovered wasn't a diet plan. It was a relationship between her needs, her wisdom, and her plate. A relationship built not on fear or rules, but on quiet reverence for the body that continues to carry her forward. With every meal, she wasn't just eating. She was choosing life, again and again with every bite. It was a rainy Tuesday when Ms. Lucy walked past the notice board at the community center and paused. A flyer had caught her eye. Soft blue paper, handwritten letters that read, "Art for the Soul." She smiled. Something in the phrase stirred a memory of afternoons long ago, when she used to sketch flowers from her garden just for the pleasure of it. No goal, no audience, just her, a pencil, and a quiet kind of joy. She took the flyer home. That same week she signed up for a class, not because she needed to stay busy, but because part of her missed learning. Not the kind of learning that came with textbooks and grades, but the kind that makes the heart feel spacious, alive, curious. The classroom was simple: a circle of tables, a warm cup of tea for each person, and a teacher who introduced herself with a story rather than a lesson plan. The first project was a piece of fabric and some thread. Ms. Lucy refused the nursing home and found 6 solutions that changed her aging. Ms. Lucy was 74 when her family, with loving concern, brought up the idea of a nursing home. They meant well, but inside, something in her paused, like a thread, pulling her gently inward. She stood there, listening not just to their words, but to her own truth rising softly within her chest. Her house was old, so was she. But every creaking floorboard, every beam of afternoon light falling across her kitchen table, reminded her of who she still was, and what she wasn't ready to let go of. This wasn't just about staying home. It was about staying present in her own life, so she said no, kindly but firmly. Not because she didn't feel the weight of her years, but because she believed they had brought her to a deeper kind of wisdom. One that said, "You're still here, you still matter, and you still have choices." Ms. Lucy chose not to fade into the background of her own story, and that choice changed everything. Today, you'll hear what came next. 6 simple, powerful steps she took that didn't just support her aging, they transformed it. So if you're listening with tired bones or a heart full of questions, let her story meet you where you are. Quietly, gently, like an old friend taking your hand and walking with you for a while. Ms. Lucy's story didn't begin with a dramatic moment. It started with something much quieter. One morning, standing in her bathroom, she caught herself reaching for the wall, not because she was afraid, but because something inside her whispered, "It's time." That whisper followed her back to the kitchen, where she sat with her usual morning tea. She looked around, noticing things she hadn't seen in years. The way the rug curled up at the corner, the soft flicker of light that never quite reached the far end of the hallway, and the way her once comfortable armchair now asked more from her knees than it used to. Her house hadn't changed, but she had. It wasn't about giving up or making things easier. It was about honoring the woman she was now, someone who had walked through time with strength and softness, and who deserved a space that moved with her, not against her. So she began. She added a support bar beside the bathtub, not because she felt fragile, but because she knew that wisdom often walks hand in hand with preparation. She gently folded up the old rugs that had once brightened the floor and replaced them with ones that stayed firmly in place. She changed the bulbs in her living room to a warm, inviting light that softened the shadows and welcomed her in. It didn't take much. A few thoughtful changes, a few gentle choices. One afternoon, she invited a neighbor over. They walked through the house, together, slowly, room by room. They talked about comfort, about light, about how a home, like a body, can become more caring with age. They smiled at the little things. A handrail here, a softer mat there. Each change was a gesture of love, not just for safety, but for ease, for grace. Her home, once fixed in memory, had become something more. It was now a living space, one that responded to her, supported her, held her. Ms. Lucy hadn't changed everything. She had simply begun listening to what her life was asking for and responding with kindness. And in doing so, she turned her home into a quiet partner in her next chapter, one that whispered back, "I've got you." There was a moment, not long after Ms. Lucy made the first changes to her home, when the quiet began to stretch, not the peaceful kind of quiet she loved in the early morning, but a different silence, one that made her afternoons feel too still, her evenings too long. Her children visited when they could. Calls came now and then, but something deeper was missing. Not company exactly, but connection. A space where she could be heard, not just checked on, where laughter came easily and presence didn't require explanation. That longing, soft and persistent, guided her to the community center, down the street. She had passed it countless times, always telling herself, maybe next week. But this time, she stepped inside. She wasn't sure what to expect. The room was filled with people she didn't know, some chatting over coffee, others sitting quietly with books or knitting in hand. And yet, something in the air felt open, like the place itself was glad she'd come. A woman with gentle eyes welcomed her. "Join us," she said. No pressure, just warmth. That was the beginning. Ms. Lucy began attending weekly gatherings. Not every day, not all the time, but enough. Enough to share a story, enough to hear someone else's, enough to feel part of something that didn't ask her to be anything but herself. They shared recipes, exchanged stories about grandchildren, talked about music and old movies, laughed at memories, held space for each other's harder days. And it wasn't just what they talked about, it was how they listened. There was no fixing, no rushing to advice, just presence. Eyes that met hers with understanding. Words that didn't try to solve but simply stayed with her. She started to notice the shift. Her days felt more grounded, her voice steadier, her heart less guarded. Not because the aches had disappeared, but because she no longer carried them alone. One afternoon, while sipping tea in the courtyard, someone asked her what had changed most since she started coming. She paused, looked around at the gentle hum of conversation, the comfort of shared silence, then said, "I think I just feel seen." That kind of support can't be measured. It grows in quiet ways, in the touch on a shoulder, the way someone remembers your favorite tea, the shared sigh at the end of a long story.